I want to begin by saying thank you to Graham Dretch for providing me with this model, which has been converted to an object. I don't know what software he used, and originally came from the Stanford scanning repository. And I wanted to use this model because it's got a nice complex geometry. The dragon and the ground are in the default grey material, and we've got the default Bryce sky. If we look from above, you can see perspective camera, infinite ground plane, and there's a little dotted mesh indicator of the dragon there, and that's all there is in the scene, and that's how things are set up. And as you can see from the render time here, it's rendering quite efficiently at this resolution. So I'm going to stick with this resolution because it's mostly going to be looking about bringing out the details in the model and the surface using advanced lighting methods. So to set this up, what I'm going to do is turn the atmosphere off, set the sky to black. That's the first thing we're going to do. And I'm also going to, for the time being, turn the sun off there, and turn the shadow intensity up to 100. The default setting when you reset the sky, it goes down to 90. Well, since I intend to use the sun in this scene as a key light, I want to be sure that the intensity is set to 100, because if it's not, then light travels through the model, which is an old-fashioned, if you like, way of allowing for the fact that the render engine couldn't generate ambient light. But we're going to use true ambient light sources, so we will have proper global illumination, so we don't need to resort to cheating. So make sure the shadow intensity is set to 100. That's an important point. Right, if we check out of this now, it should be, if a render, we see nothing in the scene. And now I'm going to switch the render mode, go render options, preview effects. It's set at 16 rays per pixel, which is where I want it, and set it down, see, so that it'll preview quickly, or quicker, depending on the speed of your computer. I'm going to check true ambience. I want TA scattering correction checked and boost light checked, and the maximum ray depth is 4. The default render setting is 6, but if you take it to a low setting, that it improves the render performance of the true ambience effect, but it degrades the quality of light the lower you set it. So the aim is to set it as low as possible. If you set it very low, then Bryce won't be able to see through transparent surfaces, and the true ambience effect won't look very far into its environment to gather its light. So it's a balance there. Now if I render again, we still see nothing, which is good, because that was the intention. We want to start with a fully black scene, and then we can start adding effects. The effect I'm going to use is one of these true ambience light gels, and this is an effect driven by the global ambient. So I want to make sure that I've got as much global ambient light available as possible. So if you click on the colour swatch there while holding the Alt key down, you can bring up this little menu and you can check you've got maximum RGB value input for the global ambient colour. I go to the create shelf and create a light source. I'm going to edit this light source so it creates the kind of light I want. So I need to check true ambience optimization. It's not going to depend on diffuse, and the intensity slider doesn't do anything. I'm going to use gel, go into the procedural. It needs to be set to normal. We don't need diffuse, we need full ambience, and we need full transparency, and that will provide as much light as we can get out of this effect. And as well as that, I need to use the influence control to include this background object, which means it's excluding everything else, which will cut off any diffuse generated true ambience from this light source. So we've only got the ambience generated true ambience, which allows us to use the boost light effect without the problem with the noise. So if I check out of this now, and what I want to do is wrap this light source, because it's the surface that generates the light, around my object in the scene. Now you can see that we've got the object lit. It's not brightly lit, but it is lit. And you can also see that this transition zone here between the inside and the outside is quite marked, which might interfere with my picture somewhat. So if I'll make it a bit larger. Now I could get rid of the sight of this transition zone by just enlarging the light source so it was huge, and it would still cast light into the scene, but now it's light in the horizon, and it's not creating the effect that I want. As you can see, that's got to render a bit while I ejected all telephones from the office. Okay, now where was I? Oh yeah, right. The effect I'm looking for is a very tightly controlled lighting environment around the Dragon, and I also intend to use one of Horo's HDRI backdrops as a source for the light gel, so I can generate a coloured lighting effect around this Dragon. So what I need to do is bring the light source back in, because if the light source is too far away, then the effect of the coloured lighting around the Dragon is going to be reduced, because the light will have time to mingle, so that the surface will be further away, so you won't see so much of an effect of the lit environment around it. I was just enlarging it there because it was clipping the end of his nose. So obviously we've got to make sure that the light's around the model, but that the surface doesn't clip the model. So that's just something to be careful of. If we modify the ground material then, and make it not diffuse but transparent and reflective, this will allow light to be reflected through the bottom side from the light source, so we'll get more all-round lighting of the model, and then we can change the distribution of light within that by modifying the gel that we're going to provide. I'm also going to introduce a maximum specular halo channel for this material, and the reason for that is I'm going to use a premium effect, blurred reflections, so that now you can see we're getting light from the underside, and the light is multiplying because the transience effect, the transience lighting, when it's gathering light, is also seeing the lit underside from the reflection. So it's trapping the light between this perfectly reflective surface and the model, and so it's multiplying the effect, or adding the effect of the light, so we get this lit underside, and it allows us to see some more detail on the scales of this model. So even though we have a very plain material on the model, we're getting some quite interesting modelling from the light. So we'll now go into render options, and we'll stick on blurry reflections there and have a look how this affects the lighting. So the lighting itself, in terms of this addition of lighting, has not changed that much, but we now have lost the distinct image of the Dragon in the reflection, so we can now focus on the figure. And as I said, what I want to do is introduce some coloured light to this, and to achieve this effect I'm going to need my to use my spherical mapper, which you can find at Bryce tutorials, Bryce downloads, in the bottom of this list here. At the moment anyway, there's the Bryce 7 Pro spherical mapper, created by Horo and myself, and what this is going to allow me to do is to convert an entire scene, which is going to be just the HDRI backdrop, one of Horo's, into a spherical map that I can then use. So to do this, I remember this time that I need a document aspect ratio of 2:1. It doesn't need to be very large, because we won't be looking at this image directly. I don't need the ground plane in the image. I can turn the atmosphere off and set it to black. I'll load in the HDRI I intend to use, and this is this specular convolved version of his Trap and Haul 2. Increase the intensity of that, because we're going to use it as a light source, so we can have a more intense background. We're not seeing it's just the light source, the gel, and I need to add it to the sky so we can see it as a backdrop. Because the scene's empty, we don't need to worry about the quality of the light, specularity, HDRI effect. I mean, if we set these down, it'll probably render a bit more efficiently, but we're dealing with a very small scene anyway. And I also need the spherical mapper, which I've saved in my object library here, and that has to be at the same origin as the camera. So I get hold of my camera and I set the camera origin to that of the spherical mapper, which is also the scene origin, and finally set the render mode to 360-degree perspective projection, and this gives me my spherical map. So I'll save that as what I saved it before. So here's my spherical map file, and then I can go back into the scene where I've got my light source and go into the light source. Here's this light source that I've created, edit it, go procedural, click on the ambient channel here, switch to picture, and load in my spherical map. You can see that I've been testing this already. So here's the spherical map. I've gone for a slightly brighter version, so I'll select this new version and see how things turn out. One thing I must remember to do, when you load a picture, it defaults to the sinusoidal mapping mode, which is one of the most useless mapping modes we've come across in Bryce. I don't know why it was added and why it should default to that when it should default to either parametric or spherical as a much more helpful option. I think I've managed to map one thing in sinusoidal, and getting a sinusoidal map's quite tricky anyway, but never mind, that's by the by. Spherical mapping mode is what you're looking for here, and it's applied through the ambient channel now, so it's providing a bit of colour, and also it's changing the distribution of light around the light source, because one side is dark, the top, and the base is light. So we'll see how that looks now. Okay, what it looks like is quite a bit darker, and but we have got some red light here along the dragon's tail, and some bluish here, and the ground in the spherical map's actually lighting the underside of the dragon. What I can do is I can copy and paste this light source, and provided I make it slightly either larger or smaller than the one I've copied and pasted it from, then I can add them together, and that will provide me with more light. So now you can see we're getting the model lit quite well with this effect. It's still grainy because I'm previewing it at lower rays per pixel. Now I'm going to modify the material of the dragon now, because it's still in the default grey, and I want some material effects. So I'll go and select the dragon, go into the material lab. The Trap and Haul HDRI comes with these materials, but they're a mixture of photo material that's been modified so it wraps, or tiles, that's the word, and also procedurals in some cases. I'm going to select this one because it's not got any reflection in it. If we start adding reflection in with HDRI, not HDRI, true ambience rendering, if we add reflection, well, it's true of HDRI as well, it really slows the render down, because you've got a lot of light sources, or simulated light sources, or simulated light gathering, whichever one method you happen to be using, and reflection. It starts all combining together to create quite a slow render. So I choose this material because it's got no reflection. The grey is a bit of a boring colour. I'm going to switch it just to the diffuse channel, which is set to this well, rather pleasant orange, I think, and I'm going to scale the material because I know from before that it was a bit too coarse. So this will, just by scaling this channel here, it'll make the pattern repeat more often, but it'll make the detail a lot finer. So that's the setup of my material. It's got a specularity response, and I'm going to turn the sun back on to take advantage of that and to provide a key light. So let's see how that renders now. So now we've got this bit of colour, and it should, if we pick an area and give it a little bit more of a render, have now got like some fine scratches and fine detail on the model's surface, though that's not really coming out just yet because we're still rendering in quite a coarse mode at 16 rays per pixel. So I'm going to go into the Skylab now, and I'm going to turn the sun back on. So here's the sunlight. I'm going to move it round. This preview doesn't do true ambience, so we'll just have to guess how things are going to look, but what I'm aiming to do is get the sun along the edge of the dragon, so it's picking out some details along its side but leaving a large shadow region that the true ambience effect is going to fill in for me with fine detail. I'm also going to increase the intensity of the sunlight a little bit, so it just gives it more striking, and I'm also going to turn soft shadows on. So I might as well do this because I'm already using premium effects, and it'll just improve the quality of the light generally and prevent any hard edges falling across the model and showing up its geometry. So we just need to go into the render options here and turn soft shadows on. So now we've got soft shadows, blurry reflections, and true ambience working together. I'm still previewing at 16 rays per pixel. So render that now, and you can see we've got this highlighted area here, and the specular coming from the sun is working with the specular channel in the material, but this area, which would be in shadow otherwise, is being filled in by the light source. So now I've just got one consideration left. Supposing I want to change this red area so it's at the top, because what I'm thinking is If we go into the radial light and edit, and we'll look at this specular map here. Predominant light from underneath, red coming from one side, dark from the top. We've got the sun coming from the left. We could turn this light source round so it's not generating any light from the direction of the sun, because that's filling it in, and we can fill in on the other side. So that's just one final thing to experiment with. So if I select both of the light sources and then work out, I can rotate them round, and I can change the characteristic of the light falling on the model. So I've got this the red part falling on it from above, and this area lit. So I thought it looks a bit odd with the tail being lit in red and nothing else. As I say, that's dependent on how far away the surface is, whether or not the predominant light is more focused. Because if you can get the light source right on top of the model surface, you can actually see an image of the gel on the model surface. So I want to avoid that, but I want some coloration in the light. So this then is the setup that I'm aiming for, and I think that perhaps I'm going to have to render a very high raise per pixel, because not necessarily because of the true ambience effect, which obviously is generating some noise in here, but because of this scattering that's occurring here from the blurred reflection. So the blurred reflection effect in itself is probably the thing that's going to demand the highest render settings. You can see here these scratches being introduced by the material itself. They weren't on the model, and the aim is to create the effect of greater detail. You've got the mesh detail of the model, and then you've got your material detail. If you can get the material detail just that little bit finer than the mesh detail, then it gives the illusion that the model is more detailed than it really is. So I mean, it's just a balance between those things. So having done all that then, and we've got everything set up, and I'll just check that I've not missed any settings. So we're definitely at shadow intensity 100%. We've got nothing in the image-based lighting tab because we're using the gels on here for that purpose. So and we've got the two light sources wrapped around one another, and we've got the key light from the sun. So I think that everything's set up now. I don't think I've forgotten anything, so I'll go into the render options and we'll set it at the 256 raise per pixel and see just how long it's going to take to render this out then. As you can see, the progress down the screen is a little bit slow, so this is probably going to take, looking at that, possibly an hour 40, I'm guessing. I've not tried this yet. In fact, it's slowing down more as it's reaching the bit where the blurred reflection is. It's having to work quite a lot harder there. So let's see. Oh, an hour 24. Okay, so there's good news and bad news. Get the bad news out of the way first. This blurred reflection effect looks a bit dodgy to me. I'm not really convinced that this is behaving in the right way. So I would probably like to change that, and as you know from my previous videos, if you've watched it, I do have a tendency to fiddle with things, but that wasn't really the aim. The aim was to light the model. So I could change the material and re-render, which would take over, I don't know, about another hour and a half or whatever it was, or I could object mask the object, just get rid of the light sources, switch it back to regular mode, switch it to object mask with the object selected, and then create a mask for this object, and then change the background, which would be an easy solution but would require post work, so some people might not like that. On the good news side, failing re-rendering and changing the floor material, because I do like the effect of the lighting on this side, so somehow I think I'd keep the reflective property or put another light source in there to get that effect. There's good modelling in the shadow areas provided by the boost lighted true ambience optimized effect there from the light sources. The coloration across the top is nice. It's picked out the bump effect from the material channel well in this area, which isn't lit by direct light, and in the past, in previous versions, this hasn't worked so well. True ambience has really struggled to find any bump information, so that's good news for the latest version of Bryce 7.1 Pro. And the anisotropic effect on the specular channel here in the materials created quite a good effect. So it should look like baked clay or cast clay, right? So a biscuit like. So it's not too. It doesn't look shiny. It should look. It should look an appropriate material for this model to be made out of, which I think in this case it does. So I'm I'm relatively pleased with the effect. I'm just a bit disappointed by the blurred reflection, how that's turned out. So, oh well, you can't win everyone. That then is the end of the video, the end of the tutorial. I hope you go on to experiment with this lighting method and produce your own renders and show them to us on either Bryce5.com or on the DAS forum there, so we can see how you're getting on.